Before I begin to describe how Black Africans invented writing, allow me to first present you with one piece of evidence that illustrates that the ancient Kemites, later called the Egyptians, were Black people. According to Senegalese anthropologist, historian, linguist, and physicist Sheikh Anta Diop, quote, "The genetic table of the races, represented in the tomb of Ramses III, 12th century BCE, shows that the Egyptians perceived themselves as blacks. In fact, the Egyptian artist does not hesitate to represent the genetic type of the Egyptian as a typical black, a Nubian. Karl Lepsius, a white scholar from Germany who made this discovery, was surprised and wrote, quote, "Where we expected to see an Egyptian, we were presented with an authentic Negro." End quote. This ruins all of the tendentious studies of ideologists and demonstrates that the Egyptians did not establish any ethnic difference between themselves and other Africans. They belong to the same ethnic universe. End quote. So yes, despite the successive invasions and migrations of foreigners over the centuries, the ancient Kemites, or Egyptians, were indeed Black Africans. German philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel once said, quote, "Africa has no history and did not contribute to anything that mankind enjoyed." End quote. When he penned those words, he was likely unaware that the very people and continent that he remarked did not contribute anything to mankind created the very first writing system and alphabet that is credited as the precursor to most other alphabetical and writing systems. In other words, Hegel wouldn't be able to write such reprehensible words if Black Africans did not invent the world's first writing system. Furthermore, he would not have been able to put pen to paper without Black Africans, as papyrus, one of the world's earliest writing materials second to stone, is the precursor to paper. The term paper actually derives from the word papyrus, the reed plant that only grows along Nile Valley, Africa. In the 18th century, when French scholar Count Constantin de Bonnet discovered the contributions of Black Africans, he stated, quote, "Just think that this race of Black men, today our slave and the object of our scorn, is the very race to which we owe our arts, sciences, and even the use of speech." End quote. Bonnet's remark on speech is referring to how Black Africans are the ones that inscribed speech into the symbols that we now call letters. Bonnet, of course, wasn't alone in granting Black Africans such credit. Likewise, French scholar Georges Gervich stated that, quote, "Black African culture set for the whole world an example of extraordinary vitality and vigor. All vitalist conceptions, religions, as well as philosophic, I am convinced, came from that source. The civilization of ancient Egypt would not have been possible without the great example of Black African culture, and in all likelihood was nothing but the sublimation thereof." End quote. Ancient Ta-Seti, later called Nubia, and ancient Kemet, later called Egypt, are among the world's earliest civilizations. Ta-seti, which is modern-day southern Egypt and northern Sudan, emerged as a civilization in approximately 3400 BCE. Kemet, which is modern-day Egypt, emerged as a civilization in approximately 3150 BCE. These black Africans, both the ancient Ta-Setians and Kemites, emerged out of the interior of the African continent along the Nile Valley and not the northern Mediterranean, as some have falsely claimed. Some of the hallmarks of a civilization include arts, sciences, record-keeping, and most notably, writing. The black Africans known as Ta-Setians created the world's first documented writing and alphabetical system called the Medu Netcher, or Medu Netcher for short, and the ancient Kemites developed this writing system further. The Medu Netcher can be translated to mean either inscriptions of divine words, written words of nature, or written words of God. Today, most people know this writing system as hieroglyphics, which means holy writings or sacred engraved letters. The ancient Greeks called this writing system hieroglyphics, and is the precursor to most other writing and alphabetical systems. Adherents of the Abrahamic religions often refer to their sacred texts as the Word of God, and that language is an homage to the Medu Netcher, even though it's rarely acknowledged as such. The Medu Netcher created by the Ta-Setians, Nubians, consisted of mostly names and labels, whereas the Kemites developed entire sentences using this writing form. The first full sentence written in hieroglyphs, or Medu Netcher, so far discovered was found on a cylinder seal impression found in a tomb of King Set-Perepsin at al-Ka'ab, which dates from the 2nd dynasty circa 2600 BC. Around 394 CE, the last known inscription was written in Philae and is known as the Graffito of Esmet Akum. One of our earliest ancient Greek sources, Diop tells us that the Medu Netcher, or hieroglyphics, originates with the Ta-Setians, aka Nubians. However, Diop referred to the Ta-Setians, or the Nubians, as Ethiopians. The ancient Greeks subsumed the ancient Ta-Setians, or Nubians, under the category of Ethiopian because much of the African people outside of Kemet, or Egypt, were referred to as Ethiopians by the ancient Greeks. Ethiopian is a Greek word meaning burnt faces. As already mentioned, it was a name that referred to the dark complexion of Africans who were living within the interior of the continent. Diop states, quote, "We must now speak about the Ethiopian writing, which is called hieroglyphics among the Egyptians. The forms of their letters are Ethiopian, for of the two kinds of writing which the Egyptians have, that which is known as popular, or demotic, is learned by everyone, while that which is called sacred is only understood by the priests of the Egyptians, who learn it from their fathers as one of the things which are not divulged. But among the Ethiopians, everyone uses these forms of letters." End quote. Throughout its long lifetime, the national languages of ancient Kemet underwent changes, and the writing system used to record the language varied. Scholars have traditionally classified its history into 5 major divisions: Old Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian, Demotic, and Coptic. There is undoubtedly a great diversity of African cultures and languages, but there's also linguistic continuity that exists across the African continent. Senegalese anthropologist, historian, linguist, and physicist Sheikh Anta Diop states, quote, "Egyptian, or Kemetic, antiquity is to African culture what Greco-Roman antiquity is to Western culture. The building up of a corpus of African humanities should be based on this fact," end quote. According to linguist Theophilo Benga, there is a, quote, "close relationship between ancient Egyptian, or Kemetic, and modern Negro-African languages," end quote. For example, according to Diop, quote, "Wolof, a Senegalese language spoken in the extreme west of Africa on the Atlantic Ocean, is perhaps as close to ancient Egyptian as Coptic. An exhaustive study of this question has recently been carried out, and kinship between ancient Egyptian and the languages of Africa is not hypothetical, but a demonstrable fact which is impossible for modern scholarship to thrust aside." End quote. In the West, it's common for scholars to refer to ancient Greece as the cradle of civilization in European writing, but the ancient Greeks learned much of what they knew, either directly or indirectly, from the ancient Kemites. To be more precise, the ancient Greeks learned their alphabet from the Phoenicians in the 8th century BCE, but the Phoenicians learned their writing system from the ancient Kemites much earlier. According to Diop, quote, "The Egyptian, or Kemetic, scribes were in the habit of inventing alphabets in the strict sense for various reasons." End quote. Given that many people are steeped in the Hebrew Christian tradition, one may be wondering, where does the Semitic writing system associated with the Hebrews fall in all of this? Well, I'm glad you asked. The writing system of the Semites predates that of the Phoenicians, but the Semites learned from the ancient Kemites as well. This is why Diop says, those later called the Semites, quote, "entered Egypt as 70 shepherds grouped in 12 patriarchal families, nomads, and left there 400 years later, 600,000 strong, after acquiring from it all the elements of its future tradition, including monotheism." End quote. Similar to the original Medu Netcher, the original Semitic writing system contained only consonants. Vowels were added much later, as the vowels are to be inferred by the speaker. One can think of consonants as bricks, and the vowels as the mortar that bind the bricks together. In summary, Hegel was patently wrong when he said, quote, "Africa has no history, it did not contribute to anything that mankind enjoyed," end quote. Amongst so many other things, Black Africans invented writing, which is one of the major hallmarks of a civilization. Scholar Anthony Browder once remarked on the words of historian Arnold Toynbee. Browder described how Toynbee was a world-renowned historian whose 12-volume work, A Study of History, divided world history into various civilizations and traced the rise, decline, and fall. Regarding people of African descent, Toynbee stated, quote, "When we classify mankind by color, the only one of the primary races which has not made a creative contribution to any of our 21 civilizations is the black race." End quote. In his book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, Exploding the Myths, Volume 1, Browder astutely states that, quote, "With minds such as Toynbee's, and those who have preceded and followed him in directing the educational institutions of the world, there is little wonder why Egypt has been removed from Africa and placed in the Middle East." End quote. As the parents of civilization, Black Africans invented writing and gifted it to the world. So when white Europeans insult Black Africans in their writing, know that they're simultaneously complimenting them, as they're using the very product of Black intelligence, i.e. writing, that they're insulting Black people's intelligence with. At bottom, such insults are simply cloaked admiration, and this admiration has been hidden from view for centuries, especially from the view of Black people. Hence why Volney said, quote, "Just think that this race of Black men, today our slave and the object of our scorn, is the very race to which we owe our arts, sciences, and even the use of speech." End quote. Well, that concludes my video. If you enjoyed this presentation from my YouTube channel, Djehuti, please like, subscribe, comment, and press that notification bell so that you'll never miss any new videos regarding the history and contributions of Black Africans. I'm Dr. Jermaine Thomas. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.